welcome to the very first Wii U episode of Boundary Break. Oh my god, I know, it's so exciting! Anyways, this episode couldn't be possible without Mega Mew and Aurum, who I will be collaborating with today. So let's stop wasting time and get going! So I'm going to be covering both hub worlds and some of the single player stages of the game, whereas Aurum's going to do all the multiplayer maps. Now, there is a lot to go over in the hub worlds, so let's start off with Inkopolis. Now, even though your freedom of exploration is kind of limited here, as you can see there was a lot put into Inkopolis to make it a living, breathing world. Like for example, all these 3D buildings in the back. Well, not all of them are 3D buildings. As you can see further in the back, it's 2D textures to represent buildings. But good luck to you if you can get a good look at those anyway, because that texture is nearly hidden behind all the actual buildings. And the 3D structures are so varied and so oddly placed that some of the city buildings are completely hidden behind others. Like for example, this tiny little guy over here. Bet no one expected to find you. Now that we've seen beyond the plaza, let's check out what's behind the train station. All the way in the back, you can see that there's this large tower, and it has 4 red lights. But what's actually really funny about them is they're actually cubes. And not only cubes, they also reflect the environment. If you look really close, you can see all 4 sides and Inkopolis within it. Speaking of cubes, here's one peculiar thing that I found in Splatoon. Now, I wasn't able to find too many hidden objects in this game, but here is one. And it's a cube that's right in the center and underneath Inkopolis, and the texture is asphalt. Now, this isn't the first time we've found a random cube in Boundary Break, but this is the first time we've found a random cube that's just sitting underneath a stage like this. And now, to see the other weird discovery in Inkopolis, we have to take the camera below the Tanuki, because once we do, we can find some hatched doors. So I'm thinking that this is an unused asset, as after asking many people, no one recalls ever seeing these hatched doors before. And if we take the camera further below that, we are in a vacant room that's behind the light up billboard. But the only thing in here are 2 unique pillars. And they're unique because if we take the camera even further down, we then find the Squid Sisters, and you can see that their pillars are completely different. Now let's take a closer look at the train because there's a lot going on with the train. Interestingly enough, there's a track that pretty much goes around the entire Inkopolis. However, the trains do not commit to that. No, instead when the train is out of view and the player can no longer see it, the train will instead stop and disappear. And then later on it'll spawn on the other side, ready to start its pretend cycle. Now let's take a look at the tower because if you look very, very closely in-game, you can see that there's jellyfish up in the windows. So it begs the question, what else is inside that tower? And when we take the camera inside, we can see that there's actually exhausts inside the tower. Now that's probably not safe for any visitors that decide to go up there, but at least they thought to include lighting. And if we look inside the next area, you'll see that there's nothing at all. Well, except for more lighting. Psych! We're not switching scenes just yet, because what's up here is the airplane. Now that we can get a better look at the airplane, we can see the color composition and the design of the airplane itself, which will actually be a lot more interesting later on in this episode. But for now, the design of the airplane is very similar to the train, where it's mostly white with stripes of purple. Purple's a good color. Nice choice, Splatoon. Nice choice. There's also some nondescript airplane jargon that you usually see on the bottom of airplanes, on the bottom of this airplane. Now, it looks like numbers and codes and stuff like that, but if you look at it closely, it's that weird Splatoon language that looks like it could be English, but it's not. Next up is something I noticed last second on my little journey here, is that the fox actually has textures underneath his paws, unlike the Tanuki. And what's interesting about what's underneath these paws is that they're red, just straight red, which is a very intentional design, so it's really funny that you never get a chance to see it. Now here is one Twitter request that I didn't even think about whatsoever. Latius Lover 97 on Twitter asks, how detailed is the giant amiibo box that you go to use your amiibo in the game? Is there anything on the back of the box? And what's funny about this request is that I didn't believe it at first. I figured you could use the camera that every player has access to and just see the back of the box by moving the camera around. So if we use Magic Camera to get back there, it does turn out that, yeah, there is details on the back of the box. That was a great suggestion, Latius. I really appreciate it, man. Next up is Captain Cuttlefish, my personal favorite character from this game. Sorry, Judd. But why are we looking at Captain Cuttlefish? Well, it's because when you start the game for the first time, you can see Captain Cuttlefish off in the distance, kind of creeping on you a little bit. And as you get closer, he kind of retracts into the sewer, which it turns out is Octo Valley. But if we take the camera below the stage, we can see where he goes. And as you can see, he just immediately disappears. But what's really cool is that his signature cane does not leave him. It has to be with the character model for some reason. And so, because of that, his cane is underneath the character's field of view. And then the last thing we're going to look at is the Ferris wheel. And we're going to look at the Ferris wheel because it's got an enormously basic texture to represent it. Essentially, to make the Ferris wheel, the developers used a gray outline to represent the Ferris wheel, and then that outline itself is really low textured. You can see the pixels coming off of the texture, which is something you very commonly see in textures that are very, very far away. Now on to Octo Valley. Now this was a very popular quest, and I don't blame them, because with Octo Valley, you start off in what looks like all mountainous walls. But as you get further and further into the game, your character rises further and further up, and towards the end you can finally find out a couple things. One is that there's a giant octopus. I guess it's not a statue, it's more of a mountainous phenomenon. But you can also see Inkopolis off in the distance. Way off in the distance. And of course, if you ever see that, you want to see just how detailed that area actually is. So if we take the camera over there, we can see some of what the minimalized Inkopolis actually looks like. And as you can see, outside of the tower that we looked at earlier, there's really not much here that resembles Inkopolis. In fact, there's things here that we hadn't seen before, like a dock, an open concrete space. There's just not much else. And now that we've seen what's above Octo Valley, we gotta ask what's below it. And believe it or not, there isn't just an abyss underneath Octo Valley. They actually took the time to make a bottom to the valley. And as you can see from this view, it's done with a square. And for those curious about the other end of the stage, it's all 2D textures. Nothing too interesting, but, you know, if we don't check it out, people are gonna be curious anyway. And now we're checking out the single player stage, Trouble Over Inkopolis. Now there's a lot to look at here, but unfortunately the way that most games on Wii U work is that there's a lot of haze and fog when you look out in the distance. I just wish there was a way to get rid of it.
Oh wait, you didn't want the fog? Well, no problem, here you go.
Orem! That was amazing! But apparently when you get rid of the fog, there's also a blur effect that... Alright, are you like some kind of wizard or something? Well, now that we can look at this map with a fresh pair of eyes, I figure we can take a much better look. So the first thing that we're going to look at is this blimp over here that you can usually see flying above the city. But now we get a much better look at it, and you can actually see some details that are a lot harder to see. Like for example, it has some gyrocopters attached to the cabin of the blimp, as well as a blue spot right at the very end of the blimp. And if we take the camera down into the city itself, you can see that it's actually pretty robust. You can see cars commonly driving around, as well as parked cars. And of course we gotta see if Mew's under the truck, and of course he's not. And then on the other side of the stage you can see a park. And over in this park you can see a gazebo with benches, which is really cool. But if there's nothing else to see, we can do a zoom out of the rest of the area. Well, now with Magic Camera 2.0, we can explore other single player stages. Instead of looking like this, it looks like this. Now, if you're familiar with Splatoon, you'll know that your enemies dwell in domes underground and have to make fake environments. Like for example, here this outdoor looking area is being broadcasted on TV panels. But what happens when we take ourselves outside the boundaries? As it turns out, every single player stage in Splatoon is also being held captive inside of a giant cube, which is very peculiar. And what's outside that cube, you might ask? Well, at that point, it's just the void. And it's not a very exciting looking void in this game either, as it just causes a weird trippy effect. And while we're in this stage, let's take a look at the top. Now, as you'll notice here, there's a lot of stalactites, and again, that's because all of these dome areas are underground. But one thing you don't really get a great look at is the light source. In every single stage, there's actually a light illuminating the entire dome, which is a nice touch, because they certainly didn't need an excuse to have light in the stages. And now that there's no fog or distance between us, we can get a little bit of a better look at it. And now we're going to take a look at the testing area, and the reason is because it's actually pretty surprising how much is actually outside of these walls. In normal game mode, you can see buildings bleeding outside the fence, but much to my surprise, when we actually get our character outside of the boundaries, we can see an entire city. Now granted, most of this is reused assets from other levels, but it's still surprising to me that they actually went for the trouble of planting an entire city around a testing area that just doesn't allow you to see. And what's really funny is that the tower over here has cars that are parked right next to it. Now I can rationalize copying and pasting a town and just dropping it in the middle of this testing area, but why they chose to add these cars here, I'm not so sure. And now I'm going to turn it over to Orem from the Hack Attack series. Orem, if you don't mind.
So first off, we're starting with the museum stage. This level boasts many moving parts, very unlike normal exhibits in our world. But where this fictional area excels, it's in the background. There's so many cool things out of bounds that make the stage really feel like a museum, like this incredibly detailed statue, which is fully textured and modeled. There's actually 2 of them, both being rather far away. The yellow statue is actually behind these 2 benches that really give the feel that you're in a really fancy outdoor art hall, which I personally love. Even this inkling statue is just so cool looking. And going further out the map, you'll start to see these details fade off. The trees, for example, are low poly with very flat leaves. The buildings too use smaller textures and less polygons, obviously to save on memory. In addition, we've got some coaling behind the buildings and some very flat bushes in the background. Next up, we have Port Mackerel with a ton of neat stuff. We have standard low poly buildings, a few mountains, and even some wind turbines. Back on the mainland, there seems to be a truck here, probably for moving boxes and tools around the shipyard. Over on the side, there's these 2 jelly guys having a nice conversation. And of course, I can't forget to mention the absolutely massive cargo ship. Above the stage is actually an airplane flying up way high, which is pretty nice. And funny enough, that airplane's actually using the same texture as a backdrop building. Guess they never figured the player would actually notice. Moving on over to Anchovy Games, if we immediately move past the ceiling, you can see that we have a few flat trees, blocky buildings, and even the outside of the building what the stage is held on, which is for some reason almost completely modeled and even textured. It's pretty surprising, because I don't think there's any angle that you could actually see the outside of this building. Back on the inside, there's this fully textured and modeled purple room, which is well off to the side and doesn't really have any reason to be here. There's no windows, so you would really never know that this room exists through normal means. And that's pretty interesting. And lastly, we have Urchin Underpass, where there might be a very dark secret hidden above. On the overpass, baked into the concrete are some footsteps with little squid patterns on them, and they lead to somewhere off the side of the road. Perhaps a squid construction worker took a super jump with no return? I personally have no idea, but it's definitely fun to speculate.
Hey, thanks a lot, Orem. By the way, Orem just put out a Hack Attack episode on Splatoon itself. I even do a little bit of a cameo, so if you want to check it out, which I totally think you should, a link is provided down below. Alright guys, that was Splatoon, our first Wii U game ever.
Get inked.
Get inked, bro. I don't think that's a phrase from the game. I want to make Mega Mew for providing the initial code. I want to thank Orem for expanding on the code and making it even better and making this episode as great as it could be. I also want to thank Orem for collaborating on this episode. Orem, you're the man. I know you always try to play it cool, but you're the man.
Props.
Mad props. Quick little news. Pat's going to be Milwaukeeing over to another state. What convention are you going to be at, Pat?
What's it called? It's called Anime Milwaukee.
Anime Milwaukee. So if you want to see Pat, all you got to do is just remember his face. It's right there. Don't worry about it.
Come on now.
I'll put a picture of him up here. It's
God.
gonna be the least flattering picture I can find of him.
Is it that one from the Christmas party?
Well, we'll see. No vote this week because I know you guys won't vote for it unless you see it in practice. So next week is going to be Earthbound.
Ooh.
Yeah. And
That's a Derek favorite right there.
It's one of my favorite games of all time. And if you want to see what that episode's going to be like, I have a little preview of it on my Twitter account. Going to leave a link to that down below. And
Or on the side.
Oh.
You have a box you can utilize.
Yeah, I can put it right here. I think. All right, guys. I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.
Bye, Internet.
See you in Milwaukee. Not me.
Not Derek.
But Pat.